Hey everyone, welcome to The Week in Doubt, episode 43. This was going to be the post-Christmas episode, but I've been dragging my feet, so I guess I'll just consider it the post-holiday episode. No shout-outs this week because I've been negligent with my homework and haven't checked out the Facebook page or any of the other mediums for getting in touch with me, but I promise that I'll check those out before next episode. And if I see that any of you have given me a review or tried to get in touch with me, I'll be sure to mention it next week. So I guess I should do some house cleaning, figuratively speaking. If you're a regular listener, then you've probably heard me mention some other podcasters that I sometimes collaborate with. There's Chris Webber from C-Web Sunday School. There's the infamous dumbass of Invisible Sky Monster and A Dumbass's Guide to Knowledge fame. And then there's also the boys from A Matter of Doubt podcast. I think that those two guys may have started a new podcast. I'm not sure if the A Matter of Doubt podcast, if they're going to keep that going or if they're going with the new one. But I'll look into that and I'll fill you in next episode. Anyway, in the past, we did collaborate on a roundtable discussion, and Chris was kind of the ringleader, and he did most of the heavy lifting. He was the interviewer, and also he edited the recording and published it on iTunes as an episode of his podcast, which is C-Web Sunday School. Well, we all got together again and took part in a second collaboration. I guess it's not so much a roundtable discussion since we're not really interacting directly with one another. We are all recorded separately, and it's basically just the four of us. Well, if you count the two hosts from The Matter of Doubt, that's five of us, and we all just give our opinion on the label atheist and the implications of it, the stereotypes associated with it, whether or not we think at the end of the day that the word atheist is a good thing or is it problematic. And that's actually all been edited by Chris and put together, and he released it as episode 24 of his podcast. Once again, that's C-Web Sunday School, and it's been available for download via iTunes since December 23rd. So if you want to check that out and support Chris's podcast by doing so, you can just go to iTunes and get the free download. I felt like I may have been a little off my game that day. I probably sound even a little groggier or spacier than usual. I feel like I may have over-peppered my speech with ums and awkward pauses. There I go again. But I think the other three guys did a great job as always. And if you're a fan of this podcast, then you'll probably already be familiar with my take on the subject. But I think it's still worth listening to just to hear an assortment of thoughtful non-believers all give their take on the label atheist and its implications. And by listening to it, you'll also be exposed to some other skeptical opinions other than just my own. And who knows, you might find yourself liking what some of the other guys have to say and might become a fan of their podcasts as well. It is funny, though, how we each recorded our piece separately, and yet when you listen to them back to back, it's kind of uncanny, or maybe not so much, how similar some of our thoughts and opinions are regarding the topic of the label atheist. All of us seem to agree that there's this kind of wrong-headed stereotype people have that an atheist is someone who has this ironclad belief that there is no God, when in fact it seems to be more the case that we as non-believers doubt the existence of things like a God or an afterlife. But hopefully at the same time we're humble enough and open-minded enough to realize or admit that at the end of the day, we can't claim to be able to prove or know for certain that there is or isn't a God. Our reason just leads us to doubt the existence of at least man-made concepts of God, if not the existence of a creator in general. But trying to sort out all the different labels and terms associated with atheism can be a little maddening, if not just downright silly. If you go to Wikipedia and enter the word atheism into the search field, you'll see that there's this whole spectrum of terms. There's weak atheism, strong atheism, agnostic atheism, implicit versus explicit atheism, negative versus positive atheism. There's agnostic theism, there's agnostic atheism. If you move into agnosticism, there's also weak agnosticism, strong agnosticism. And as I've talked about a lot on the show, there's that overlap between atheism and agnosticism in the sense that neither a reasonable agnostic nor a reasonable atheist would claim to know for certain whether or not there is a God. So it gets a little crazy. So sometimes, just for the sake of brevity, I'll even refer to myself as an atheist. But at the end of the day, I doubt the existence of a creator and an afterlife, because that's the standpoint that I'm led to by my reason. I know what I think, but I don't necessarily know what every label associated with atheism implies or what other people project onto it. So I think that's why, in a way, sometimes I like to kind of eschew labels. And also I want to make sure that I don't fall into the trap that I begin to associate or identify myself too much with a given label. And then instead of searching for the truth, I might get swept up in being a standard bearer or arguing on behalf of the home team instead of arguing on behalf of the search for the truth. But if I did have to pick a label, I am kind of partial to agnostic atheism. I actually think it was a YouTube viewer who goes by the handle of Denver Chris 79, I think. A really good guy who I became kind of online friends with because he took interest in the YouTube version of the podcast. And I think he was the first one to introduce the term agnostic atheism to me. And if you read the online definition, agnostic atheism is a philosophical position that encompasses both atheism and agnosticism. Agnostic atheists are atheistic because they do not hold a belief in the existence of any deity, and agnostic because they claim that the existence of a deity is either unknowable in principle or currently unknown in fact. So I think that gets kind of close to my worldview, except I don't think that I hold the opinion that the existence of a creator or a deity is unknowable in principle. I think it's unknown in fact at the moment. But I am of the mindset that as we continue to increase our scientific knowledge of existence and the universe, that we may actually at some point be able to get to the point where we can say definitively that there's not a God, or that you don't need God in order to explain existence, or who knows, to be fair to the believers, maybe we'll come across some mind-blowing scientific discovery that implies that there is a creator. Who knows? But being the skeptic I am, I'm doubtful. And already we have people like Lawrence Krauss and Stephen Hawking in the scientific community who claim that we already can, or that we're pretty darn close to being able to say that we don't need God as part of the equation in order to explain existence or the creation of the universe. And Stephen Hawking said something along those lines a few years back. I think they even had a documentary on either the Science Channel or the History Channel that revolved around his belief to that effect. And also Lawrence Krauss talks about the kind of mind-bending idea that nothing really isn't nothing, and nothing is filled with this kind of bubbling potentiality, in fact, that nothingness has a weight, and we can explain how the Big Bang from there, or extrapolate how the Big Bang took place without needing God in the equation. But then, of course, if you're a believer, you can argue that, well, where did that bubbling quantum, quote-unquote, nothingness come from? So that's one thing believers will probably always have on their side, is that no matter how much we're able to explain about the origins of the universe scientifically, they can always take a step back and say, well, God did that. That was God's starting point. But anyway, you've probably heard me talk about this stuff numerous times, so I'll move on to another topic. So last week was the Christmas episode, and that had been something I'd been looking forward to doing since just about the beginning of the podcast. As I've explained numerous times, yeah, I'm a skeptic, I'm a doubter. I think religions and the concepts of God they contain are all man-made. And yet at the same time, simultaneously, I'm fascinated by religion, by the history of religion, by mythology. And I love the holidays, and I've long been aware of the pagan roots of holidays such as Christmas, Easter, Halloween, and I'm just fascinated by it. And I had fun putting that Christmas episode together. If you heard it, I hope you had fun listening to it. I hope you enjoyed it. It's funny, I love Christmas music. Not really the poppy kind of Christmas music like Mariah Carey or whoever the flavor of the month is singing, White Christmas or something like that. I love like old Victorian carols. I love medieval European carols. Stuff like I Saw Three Ships, or the Coventry Carol, Carol of the Bells, Good King Wenceslas. Stuff like that. And I wanted to use some of my favorite Christmas music as kind of a backdrop for the Christmas episode, but I didn't want to get nailed, especially since I had a message from a sponsor at the beginning of the episode. So I figured I'd better play it safe. I looked for some royalty-free Christmas music, and it was just dreadful. It was just this god-awful synth music or whatever. It was just nasty. So what I decided to do was go into GarageBand and just try to find some tasteful kind of loops that seemed to complement the mood I was trying to set. So I was able to find some medieval lute music and stuff like that that I think worked out rather well. It's kind of funny though, during the portion of the show where I'm discussing the Yule log, I found this campfire sound effect in GarageBand. I'm like, oh, that's awesome, that'll work perfectly. And I didn't really realize till after the fact that you can hear crickets. So I was trying to set like this midwinter feel with the crackling Yule log, and you can hear insects chirping as if it's the like spring or summer. But anyway, I'm trying to think if there were any factual errors I had to correct. I don't think so. I might have butchered a couple of names, I think. I was talking about not the first Christmas in the Americas, because that would be factually inaccurate, but it was Captain John Smith that gave us, I believe, the first recorded mention of a Christmas in North America. And due to bad weather, he and his company were forced to celebrate Christmas in less than ideal surroundings. And I think it was in a native region that I pronounced as Kecoughtan, but it could, I think maybe it was Kecoughtan. But when I was trying to research it and find the pronunciation, they said one way you're never supposed to say it is Kickoffton. So I don't know. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly or not. Then also when I read the full title of Prince Albert, the German husband of the English Queen Victoria, because I'd been discussing how he had brought the custom of the Christmas tree with him from Germany to England when they wed. And I read his full title, and there may have been a couple of German words in there that I butchered. My apologies if that's the case. So I don't think there was any really factual errors. It is funny, though. I've long been aware of the pagan roots of Christmas. And I had this almost cartoon image in my head, even though I know that real Vikings didn't have horned helmets. That's like a fantasy element. Because of the way it had been explained on the History Channel and stuff like that, I always had this kind of silly image in my head of a Viking with a horned helmet chopping down an evergreen, dragging it into his Norse abode and decorating it the way that we might, or something like that. And when I looked into it, the link between the Christmas tree and Norse paganism wasn't actually as clear or direct as I expected it to be. We do know for certain that there's numerous pagan cultures that decorated with evergreens, and some of them as disparate as the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Hebrews, people we wouldn't associate with the Christmas tree at all. But supposedly ancient Egyptians would decorate with palm fronds, and the Hebrews had similar practices, I guess. And obviously Nordic cultures decorated with evergreen boughs and wreaths and things like that. And there's a good chance they may have very well chopped down trees and brought them inside. Or I thought at one point, I remember reading or hearing that Nordic pagans may even have decorated the trees while they were outside. And there are stories after the Christianization of Scandinavia of supposed lingering practices of dragging evergreen trees inside of barns to help scare away malignant spirits and things like that. But if you trace back the roots of, or if you try to trace back the roots of Norse pagan midwinter festivals, it's hard to find any direct mention of them dragging evergreen trees inside. But like I said, it was common for many cultures to venerate and decorate with evergreen plants and trees because supposedly they were seen as symbols of eternal life due to the fact that they remained healthy and alive and kept their green color even in the midst of harsh climes or harsh winters. When I tried to research it, no credible source would blatantly link the Christmas tree directly to the Vikings, although I wouldn't be surprised if, like I said, they did decorate with evergreen trees because they were known to decorate with evergreens in general. Yeah, it was kind of weird. Even when I looked at sources like the Encyclopedia Britannica or things like that, the farthest they would go is to say that ancient cultures decorated with evergreens, but the exact origins of the Christmas tree were a little murky, even though by the Middle Ages or the Renaissance, there were devout Christians who had begun celebrating with Christmas or Yule trees. And then during the Victorian era, when Prince Albert brought the Christmas tree to England, it quickly caught on in England, and then the custom quickly spread to America. And before you know it, people thought they had been doing that forever, when it was a relatively recently reawoken custom. But anyway, what am I doing? A repeat of the Christmas special? I already talked about all this stuff. Which reminds me, though, at the end of the show, there's a reason why I didn't read a message from any sponsors at the beginning of the show, because I want to try to play one of my favorite medieval carols at the end of the show, and I want to try to minimize any copyright issues. So maybe if I consider this show a freebie and I'm not making money off of it, I don't have to worry about infringement as much. I don't know, but we'll see what happens. And there was one other thing I was going to talk about. I think it was Christmas Eve, after everything had wound down for the night. I got settled in and I found a documentary I'd never seen before on the History Channel. I think it was History, and it was called Proving God. It intrigued me enough that I got inundated with iTunes gift cards. So I actually went to the iTunes store and I was happy to find it there listed under history specials and downloaded it. And the title of it is Proving God. And it reminds me of, I used to have this English professor. He was this cool guy at the time. I think he was maybe in his late 30s or early 40s, relatively young, youthful guy. And I hope he still has a job, because I remember he used to drop the F-bomb in class all the time. But anyway, he used to jokingly talk about History Channel shows like Monster Quest and all those type of things, and how they always start off trying to lure you in as if they're really going to answer the question that night, that whether or not there's a Bigfoot, whether or not there's a Loch Ness Monster. Like, they might actually prove by the end of the show that there's a Loch Ness Monster. Like, they're going to drag a huge plesiosaur out or something like that in a giant fish tank. But of course, they never do. So you kind of go in knowing that, man, by the end of the show, they're not going to have any real evidence of Bigfoot or a Loch Ness Monster. But you watch it anyway. You kind of engage in a certain degree of suspension of disbelief. Well, I think that's what they're kind of doing with this Proving God thing. Like, they tried to reel you in, like, this History Channel special might actually tell us if there's really a God or not. But of course it didn't. It just kind of had a back and forth of opinions from believers and non-believers, skeptical members of the scientific community, and some scientists who seem to be more sympathetic with the point of view of believers. But they had this one scientist, and here I am being negligent again. I meant to rewatch the show and take detailed notes, but they had a scientist who had been running a series of brain scans. He did this experiment where I think it was only a small group, but he had some believers. I think they might have been somewhat varied, like Buddhist monks, Franciscan nuns, and he also had atheists who were atheists but also well-versed in spiritual practices like meditation and different types of trance, etc. And he claimed that, no, I'm thinking, was it the parietal lobe? But he could tell by looking at the brain scan that the people who are real believers, the monks and the Franciscan sisters or whatever, when they're in the height of their prayer or their religious ecstasy or whatever, it seemed like they could tell by the brain scans that they completely became unaware of their surroundings. Like, they completely lost themselves. Well, the atheist meditation practitioners never quite reached that state where they were always to some degree aware of their surroundings or of their individual self. And I remember I felt kind of insulted because the guy was talking, the scientist conducting the experiment was saying how it was if the atheists either didn't like to think about God or couldn't think about God, or they just couldn't quite get it. You know, he was talking about them like there was something deficient about them. And I took issue to that in a number of ways. And I think a number of times on this show I've talked about how there's this kind of misconception that atheists aren't quote-unquote spiritual, that they can't be in touch with the quote-unquote transcendent. And the reason why I keep throwing quotes around is because I think all of us, as other atheists have talked about, people like Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, all of us are susceptible to what people would call transcendent or spiritual experiences, a sense of kind of oneness with the universe or nature, a sense of the dissolving away of the ego, or feeling moved by art, nature, landscape, music, things like that. But you could ascribe those experiences to brain chemistry. You don't necessarily have to ascribe them to divinity. And so I think not only did I feel insulted by a non-believer, by the guy kind of insinuating that atheists just didn't get it or didn't want to think about God, it made me wonder, I mean, he might have been onto something, who knows? Maybe more rational or reason-based people are capable of staying more anchored in themselves and don't get lost as easily. But then, as I've said, you know, from my own personal experiences, yeah, I'm a non-believer, but I'm also an artist of sorts, someone who's been scribbling and drawing since practically the crib, someone who also writes music, who loves getting lost in music, someone who's constantly being struck by creative inspiration, someone who easily becomes in awe of nature. And I've had, for lack of a better term, transcendent experiences, a lot of them in my life, where I felt like a kind of sense of oneness or something like that. So I'm wondering if one way he just did, maybe he had too small of a test group. Or then you also have to say, even if he did have a point, what does that say about the concept of spirituality? Sure, the idea of cosmic oneness, of the ego dissolving, is something you find certainly in Eastern religion, like Buddhism and Hinduism, and also in Christian mysticism. But is that spirituality for everyone? Maybe to some people, spirituality is still being aware of the individual self, but seeing everything around you is kind of enchanted or imbued with a spiritual quality. Is spirituality for everyone the dissolution of the ego? I don't know. But it's food for thought. And that's something, if you're looking for, I'll say good, I suppose. I guess I'll use that adjective. If you're looking for a good documentary to watch, or at least a thought-provoking one. It was called Proving God, and it was from the History Channel, I believe. And I was able to download it from iTunes. I think I might have downloaded for $1.99 or $2.99. But that being said, I think I'm going to play that medieval carol for you, and hopefully I don't get in trouble. I think instead of using one of the recorded versions that I've got from iTunes, I'll use a version I snipped from an episode of Rick Steves' European Christmas. Oh, and one more thing before I play that tune. I gave a shout out to Denver Chris 79. It may be 78. He's a really good guy, and I don't want to butcher his handle. So, but anyway, and the name of the song is Intonant Hodie. And it's a medieval carol, and I believe it has something to do with St. Nicholas. And you'll even notice certain times of the song, they repeat a vowel sound like 3 times. I think those 3 consecutive sounds that are supposed to represent, it depends on which version of the folk story you're going with, either 3 sailors or 3 children rescued by St. Nicholas. But it's Intonant Hodie, and this one is actually from Rick Steves' European Christmas. All right.